Hey guys, today in the shop we're going to be replacing the rusted out bed rails on the new short bed for the shop truck. Stay tuned. I think this video is going to be one that's going to help quite a few out. This is becoming more and more common. This is applicable to 99 all the way to 2016. The beds are all the same. They suffer from the same issues, especially if you're from the northern states where we have snow and rust and salt and all that. If you're from the southern states, this isn't as common, but maybe you got a truck from New England that made its way down there, but what will happen is the bed rails themselves will rot out. The rest of the bed can typically be in good shape. Mine needs some wheel well repairs also, but the rails will rot out and then the bed will sag. So you'll end up getting, the signs of it will be that the bed doesn't line up with the bed lines, with the body lines on the cab. Another sign will be you hit bumps and you can hear the bed just kind of bouncing around and jangling around. So Dorman has a kit here, and it comes with all the rails. This happens to be a short bed kit because we're doing a short bed conversion on my shop truck, but they also make a long bed kit, and it comes with all the rails you need, and then the bolts, all the clips that hold the bolts onto the frame, all the hardware, washers, everything you're gonna need to get the job done. And what I'll do is I'll put links in the description below to the long bed and the short bed kit, so you can go check those out. And if you need them for your truck, you can purchase them right through those links. But you really don't need a whole lot to do this. You're going to need a grinder, you're going to need some pry bars and basic hand tools and stuff like that, and then a welder. So if you don't have access to a welder, it kind of makes this job impossible, but it's not that hard to get your hands on them. You don't need a real strong welder. It's only sheet metal, so even something simple from Harbor Freight or Home Depot would do the trick to weld these on. But first step is getting the bed off the truck. When trying to get this bed off, don't even bother trying to use a Torx bit to take these bolts. If the bed is in the condition where these bed rails need to be replaced, those bolts are not going to come out. You're just going to wreck your Torx bit. You're going to have a really bad time. So what I do, and some people have different methods. Some people will just torch the head of the bolts off. I don't like to do that because it kind of makes a mess of the bed. But I take a cutoff wheel and I just grind a little star into the head of the bolt. Then once you get a nice little star right through, cut right down through to the washer, so you know you got all the way through the bolt head. You can take a air chisel with a sharp bit and just start chiseling away at the bolts. This is a little tedious, but I'll tell you, it saves a lot of time over breaking Torx bits and trying other methods. This is what I found is the path of least resistance to get these bolts out. After you get all the bed bolts out and you know everything's nice and free, then you can take the filler neck out. There's 3 bolts. There should be a 7mm that hold the filler neck in behind the fuel door. If you have an 11 and up with the DEF, you need to make sure that you take out that filler neck for the DEF system also. Then you can just pull the filler necks down and tuck it next to the frame. Then all that's left after that is to unplug the wiring for the tail lights. It's kind of up behind the bumper, up underneath the truck, and you can just unplug that and just tuck it out of the way. Now, my bed was already off the truck, this short bed, and the long bed, I'm sure as you guys know, there's really not much left to it. So I didn't really show actually lifting the bed up and off the truck, but you can get creative with this. If you have equipment, kicking around, or even a 2-post lift or anything, you can use that to lift the bed up. But what I found is if you get a few buddies, sometimes you got to provide them with beer or pizza or whatever it may be, but you pick the bed right up and just walk it back. It is tricky. The bed is awkward. Just be real careful with it. And then another thing you want to look out for is when you do get the bed off, try your best not to rest it down, or if you do have to rest it down, be really careful on the actual arches of the bed. They're really not that strong, especially If they're rotted out and the supports, the little arms that go from the corners of the wheel arches over to the bed rails aren't connected anymore, you can really mangle the bottom of your bed. So try to be real careful about that. If you can rest it down on the grass or on something soft, and then get the bed flipped upside down. And I usually take a couple of 2x4s and I put them underneath the top bed rails, the plastic covers themselves, just so if you got it on the floor or on your driveway, you're not damaging the surface of that plastic. So now that you get your bed upside down and in the garage and ready to start working, what I like to start with is taking the supports off that go from the wheel arches to the actual rails. They're typically a 10mm bolt unless they've been changed before. Sometimes they come out. Sometimes if you see like on the other set over there, they already ripped right out of the rails, so there's nothing left to them. But you can take them off on the arches, get these right out of the way. I have to replace that one over there. It's bent. So let's go ahead and get these off. This type of job, I'm going to warn you right now, from here on out, you're going to want to wear safety glasses and a good pair of gloves, even a cheap pair of gloves, Harbor Freight. Just protect yourself because this does get messy. There's going to be a lot of rust flying around. There's going to be a lot of sharp edges, and definitely make sure you're up to date on your tetanus shot. So after those supports are off, what I like to do is just take a pry bar and start just kind of prying at the bed rails. So what this will do is it'll peel up the sides and you'll start to see exactly where the spot welds are. And then on the rails that are bad enough, it'll actually just pop the piece right off so it's out of your way. So just take a pry bar, go along, do your best not to mangle the floor of the bed, but just go along and just start to pry up on all these and try to loosen up what you can and save yourself some time grinding. All right, so as you can see, I got a good chunk of some of these rails off. I got this whole rail almost completely off except for a few little spots I got to clean up. And then this rail is only held on by a couple of spot welds there. And then that one right there is the most difficult to deal with. Typically that one, from what I've seen, doesn't rot out as bad. We also got this front one. Everything off except for where it actually attaches to the headboard of the truck. So what I do now is I go along and I use a cutoff wheel. I really like this cordless Milwaukee grinder. There's other options out there. Sometimes I'll use a torch if if I'm working in a safe environment, but I really wanted to show you with a cutoff wheel because some guys just don't have access to a torch, and then some of you just don't want to use a torch in your garage, especially on something like this. But what you got to do is just go ahead and start removing the bulk of the rest of the rail. So I don't get too concerned right now about cleaning up the spot welds. My biggest focus is just grinding off all of the pieces and then getting the bulk of these rails off. And then once you get the bulk of it off, you can start using, like this is just a cutoff wheel, but I'll switch to a grinding disc to clean up where the spot welds go. So on this front rail, sometimes it's easier just to cut it up into pieces and get it out of the way. This is where, if you are using a torch, you can make really quick work of it. You just kind of torch right at the, kind of like at the base of where the rail meets the bed, just being careful not to torch through the bed, and you can just go right at it and get that thing off. Like I said, right now, the biggest concern is getting the bulk of everything off. Once you get that off, then you can go after the spot welds. All right, so now we got all this pretty much cleaned up. I did cheat. I used a plasma cutter here. You don't have to use a plasma cutter. It just saves a lot of time. So basically, all we got to do now is take the grinding wheel and clean up all these spots. And then anywhere that you see that there's still a little bit left, this is going to take a little bit more work. You're going to move on to the next one, then so on and so forth. What I suggest is pick one rail, get it done, finish it. Then go on to the next rail, get that completely done. If you start jumping around too much, you miss things and it gets a little tricky, and sometimes it feels like it's never going to end. So if you just get one completely done, get that all cleaned up, and then on to the next one. Once we get all the remnants of the rails cleaned off, then I'm going to show you what I do next. This is where we're going to spend the majority of the time. This is 2 layers here, and it is still the old rail, and then also the bed. You can actually see it right here starting to separate. So we just got to make sure we get all that off, and then we can move on to the next step. All right, now we have everything ground off, all the spare metal, everything else is all cleaned up. So last step before we can start coating this thing and welding on is I take a wire wheel and clean up all the rust as best as I can. I use like a self-etching paint over rust type of primer, but I still like to try to get all the loose stuff up. The more prep you do now, the longer the bed will last down the road. So do your best to get this all cleaned up. Be very, very careful with these wire brushes. They are super dangerous. Absolutely need safety glasses. Realistically, a face shield is not a bad idea either. So for primer, I like to use a nice weld-through primer. So this stuff is PBE by Seymour. I get this stuff right off of Amazon. Once again, I'll put a link, like always, in the description. This stuff's pretty good because you just weld over everything that is rusty or bare metal, and then you can just weld right through it. You don't have to worry about getting it back down to bare metal to get a good weld on it. So it's very important you do this, because once the rails are on, you can't get paint underneath them. So let's go ahead and get a coat of this stuff on the hole underneath of the bed, and then we'll start placing the rails in. All right, so we can finally start welding these rails in. And couple of quick tips. You can see now that there's no support here, the bed is sagging down. So what I usually do is I slide a floor jack underneath the tailgate area of the bed, and I just jack the floor right up until it comes nice and even. And then what you want to do, the biggest tip that I can give you, is look down through the holes on the bed rails and make sure that you can see the holes are lined up for the bed bolts. And that's how you'll know that the rail is in the right spot. So you're going to want to check both sides, make sure they're nice and even, look straight down, because if those holes aren't lined up, when you go to put the bolt in, it'll be crooked. So let's get this jacked up, and then I'm gonna get my welding jacket and welding helmet on and start tacking this in. So I like to start with the rail up at the headboard, because it starts to give some structural integrity back to the bed. Like I said, make sure these holes are lined up, and definitely protect yourself. You kind of want to do this in a decently ventilated area, because this weld through primer is zinc based, so it is a little bit fumey. But you can do this with a regular MIG, flux core. I prefer MIG with gas. I think it's a little bit better of a weld, but if all you have access to is flux core, that's fine too. You don't need a lot of heat. You don't need to go real crazy. We're just tacking these rails on. So just go along, and this one is a little bit wavy, so we're going to start right here near where we jacked it up, and we might have to move the jack around a little bit. I like to weld to the floor first, and then once we get the floor welded on, then we can come along and use a pair of vice grips and start to squeeze the headboard to the rail and start to tack weld that on. So let's get a few tacks on this rail. So we got the whole front of this rail tacked up, and then what you can do is just take a pair of vice grips, a couple pairs even if you need them, and start to just pinch it together. I like to start in the middle and then work my way out. So just kind of get a couple of tacks. You may need a hammer. As you pull it apart, it does get a little bent up and a little distorted. So just get it clamped on, tack in the middle, and then just kind of keep working your way outward, alternating sides. You really don't need a whole lot of heat. Once again, this is very thin, especially if it was a little rusty and been worked a little bit. So just go nice and easy, take your time, and stitch it all right in. All right, so get it all tacked in. Try to keep your welds as evenly spaced as possible. I mean, it doesn't really matter as long as this thing is welded on there and nice and solid. That's all that really matters. So I'm just gonna go through. I'm gonna speed this up a little bit, and you're gonna follow the same exact steps for all these other rails. I really wanted to show this one because it's a little different with this front lip here on the bed, on the headboard. But how these bed rails go is tallest to smallest. So the tallest rail that comes in is going to go here, and then the next level down there, and then a little bit shorter there. And just get them on, lay them nice and even. Same thing, use a floor jack if you need to get it up, and tack them all on right across. All right, now that all your rails are in, you can start to undercoat the bed. You can use chassis saver or rubberized undercoating or whatever you prefer, and just get this thing coated up nice and good, or at least get a coat of spray paint over the welds so they don't rust through again. Obviously, once you weld, you get bare metal there. It's kind of a hot spot to get rust going again. Once you get it undercoated, you can put the little clips back on that hold all the bed supports on that go to the wheel arches. I'm not gonna put those back on just yet, only because I still have some work to do on this bed. I gotta repair the wheel arches and everything, so I don't wanna do the same work twice. But after you get that all clipped on, ready to go, then you can change the clips in the frame for the bed bolts, flip the bed back over and place it back on the truck, pop the filler neck in. Don't forget to plug your tail lights in. You don't wanna be going down the road and having no tail lights. That's an important one. And then go from there, make sure everything lines up. So I really hope you learned something from this video. It's really not a difficult job as far as skill level, but it's definitely tedious and time consuming. I'm pretty confident that most of you out there can handle this. If you're not confident with welding and you want to wait a little bit, I do plan on making a video in the future, the very near future, about at least the basics of welding. Some tips and tricks to get better welds and some of the equipment I use. And I plan on devoting an entire video just to that. So if you're not comfortable welding yet, stay tuned. I do have a video coming for that. Other than that, like I said, all the links for all the parts are going to be in the description. So if you want to get some of this for your own truck, you can do that. I'll try to put the primer, the undercoating, obviously the bed rail kits that I use, and even some of the tools I use in this video will be down there. So be sure to check that out. And make sure you check out Dorman's website. I'll put a link to their website in the description, and they have quite a few products that you may be surprised what they actually make for these trucks that can save you some time and save you some money. But if you liked the video, make sure you hit that like button. I really appreciate it. And if you haven't already, maybe give me a subscribe and help me keep this channel going. And I just want to say, as always, thanks for watching In the Shop.